Welcome back to the Death Valley Insider YouTube page. I'm your host, Kenny Van Doren from LSU Rivals, and today we're joined by a familiar face, John Garcia Jr., national recruiting analyst for Rivals.com. Been on here to talk a lot about the class of 2025 recently, with a lot of guys in Georgia, Alabama, and Florida on the Tigers' radar, especially with this new staff in place. 2 months in now, currently in the NCAA dead period, but there's still a lot going on, still a lot of communication. And one guy that's really stood out recently is in the state of Florida, and that's Gregory Thomas, a four-star cornerback. From what he told me is DB high school, like it's DBU for high school players. A lot of American heritage defensive backs have made it to college, made it to the NFL. Back then, though, when he was offered by the Tigers in November, he mentioned Kerry Cooks, the former safeties coach, was his primary contact. Kerry was a part of the part of the staff that was fired in early January. But the Tigers still remain in the top 10 for Gregory Thomas. What can you tell us about him?
Yeah, LSU intrigues him. There's no doubt about it. And look, you mentioned it. American Heritage is DB High. And back when that was all being established, the college equivalent of that was certainly LSU, 10 years ago or so. So that's something that in the culture of that high school, which is one of the best in Florida, definitely remains. And that status is always, a hot topic there. Every year, there's a blue chip defensive back at American Heritage. So it's just a matter of time before really the same schools begin to battle for the next one. And Greg Thomas is that next one. As you mentioned, just dropped the top 10 this week to celebrate his birthday. And no surprise, LSU was on the list. We saw him a couple weeks ago at a 7-on-7. LSU was one of the schools he told me he wanted to talk about. So the new staff has definitely picked up that torch from that scholarship offer and held his interest. So naturally, the next step is visit. You got to get him on campus, get him to Baton Rouge, and see where the chips fall there after that point. Because there are a lot of contenders in the race for Zay at this point. But look, he's going to take some spring trips, then some official visits, and then see what happens leading into the summer months. So if you're LSU, you just got to stay in the hunt. You don't have to be number one right now. You don't have to surge up the list. Stay in the mix for an official visit, and you're going to be in decent shape. And if I had to guess right now, I would say that he does take an official visit to Baton Rouge before all is said and done. So I do think the Tigers are in pretty good shape right now.
Yeah, and that history of DBU that you talk about, that's something he brought up as well, talking about some of these guys that he grew up admiring and got him into the college football, of admiring some of these defensive backs. And it's good too that Corey Raymond, who probably leading that charge because he is a cornerback, knows the state of Florida well. I know he was only there for 2 years before he came back to LSU, but he knows how to recruit that state well. Other schools that are on that top 10 list, just for those that want to know: Colorado, Florida State, Miami, Oklahoma, Penn State, Tennessee, Texas A&M, West Virginia, and Wisconsin. And last thing I want to mention about Greg Thomas, you got in early on the future cast for the Florida recruit, the Florida State. Do you still feel like Florida State is the leader at the moment?
Yeah, I feel like they're in good shape. He's as familiar with FSU as any school on the list. I think Miami has challenged FSU near the top of his list, but as Greg told us in that breaking update, look, he needs to get out to these campuses. Of the 10 schools that are still in the running for him, he's really only comfortable with 3 or 4 in terms of where he's visited and all of that. So I think the door is wide open for somebody to continue to come up and challenge really Florida State and Miami top that list. And I think LSU, Penn State are two of the schools that I think are going to be in the best position to do that, because he's already talking about one, maybe multiple trips to some of those campuses. So I do think the door remains open. But yeah, lifelong FSU fan. The former head coach at American Heritage is Pat Surtain Sr., who is the DB coach at Florida State. So there is certainly an influence there at Heritage, especially in the secondary where, of course, Thomas plays.
One of my favorite things are those ties in college football. Everyone knows everyone, and everyone's been somewhere that someone else wants to go to. Moving on to some of these offensive tackles that are in that region in Alabama and the South is Micah DeBose, former Georgia pledge. Looks like he's gaining a lot of steam and a lot of traction towards LSU. What have you kind of seen from him recently in recent evaluations, and just where do you think his recruitment is going?
Yeah, he's a fascinating evaluation. He's one of these elite offensive linemen regardless of position. Can he play left tackle? Probably. Can he play right tackle? Absolutely. Can he even play guard? That's not out of the question just yet. So you're talking about a true versatile offensive lineman, multi-sport guy. We saw him on Sunday at the Under Armour event, and then he's like, "Hey, I got a soccer match tomorrow." He's a goalie on his soccer team, and then he plays tennis as well. A fascinating kid to cover, but one who understands the urgency of the recruiting process. Like you said, one-time Georgia commitment. It looks like the Bulldogs are hanging around, but not necessarily at the top of the mix. On the contrary, LSU, which is really the closest school among those that he's considering. He's an I-10 corridor kind of guy out of Mobile, so it's not very far from Baton Rouge. Ohio State is up there with LSU, as well as the Auburn Tigers. So, he's looking to accelerate this part of the recruiting process. He took an unofficial out to LSU earlier this year, and everything is starting to click here between he and Brad Davis in particular. So I can see something moving quickly here. He's hinting at maybe a decision sooner rather than later. And if he stays on that trajectory, I really like where LSU stands in particular. Ohio State, he does have some family ties out there, but it's a little further away from his South Alabama base. And then you think of Georgia and Alabama, clearly those schools have work to do to recapture, the flame there with DeBose that they maybe once had. Of course, Bama with the coaching transition, and Georgia, having him, had decommitted at one point. That's never a great sign, even for a great, national power like UGA. So if the chips had to fall today, love where LSU stands. If it extends a little bit, I think it could become a bit of a dogfight, because this is one of the premier, 5 or 6 offensive linemen in the country.
I'm glad you brought up that, where he is located in Alabama as well, in the Mobile area, right on I-10, and how they can go right to Baton Rouge and take him to Louisiana. A lot of people sometimes will, bring up, is it too far from home? It's only, a state over or 2 states over for some of these kids in the South. And I know we mentioned that maybe a month ago about Ryan Williams, trying to get on a visit to LSU, but when he was kind of considering some other schools before going back to Alabama. Looking at another offensive lineman, though, is Peyton Joseph, another 4-star, but he's projected to play guard at the next level. Ended up with Florida. He told me back in December that the Tigers and Brad Davis pushed themselves into that probably number 3 spot on his list. He had the Tigers in his top 7. Ended up going to Florida, though. I mean, did you see really any chances for LSU, or did you see him kind of staying with the Gators?
Yeah, I think Florida, since the fall has really captured his attention. They had 2 O-line coaches at the time. One of them has departed for the NFL, but Rob Sale's still there, and I think that's something that was really important to Payton. I think Florida State and LSU both made it sort of interesting, but it's clear that Florida was in the driver's seat for quite some time, and really never slowed down after that visit in the fall. And that's something that Payton, really resonated with coming into this new year of 2024. So as long as he was going to make an early decision, I thought Florida was going to be in good shape, basically no matter what. But we'll see. We'll see how it is handled going forward. Obviously, that's an out-of-state school for a kid from South Georgia, and he's a road grader. He's a mauler in the middle of SEC country that programs may not slow down for. So that, coupled with what is expected to be a hot seat type season for Billy Napier, could be really interesting for all the Florida recruits, but certainly those out of state. And Peyton Joseph will be one of those that we probably keep an eye on and circle back around with a little bit more than usual.
I'm glad you brought up the hot seat as well, because it seems like everyone on our message board, it's the state of Florida. Florida is mentioned. The Gators are mentioned. It's the hot is also seat, or the seat is also hot for Billy Napier.
Sure.
Lastly here, looking at the wide receiver position for some of these route runners in the South, we mentioned that we talked about guys like Jamie French, DJ Wiley last time you were on here, Caleb Cunningham as well. Another guy that's kind of popped up with some LSU interest is 4-star wide receiver Gregory Thomas from Douglas County in Georgia. We know Cortez Hankton has that pull to Georgia, was on staff for the Bulldogs not too long ago. What have you liked from him, and where do you see his recruitment going this spring?
Look, I think what's interesting about wide receivers in the state of Georgia is that the Georgia Bulldogs have not clamped that down. That has not been a lock for Georgia. So that position in that state has long felt kind of like a wide open deal. So Aaron Gregory is one of those longtime recruits, from middle school was getting scholarship offers. So that Cortez Hankton has been on this case for some time. On top of that, speaking of Georgia, Brian McClendon has left. He is now, gone for the NFL rank. So I do think that that void at UGA is going to open the door for wide receivers in particular. And with Gregory, like we said, he's a guy who's been recruited for so very long, despite being one of the younger prospects that we'll talk about today and for the rest of this 2025 cycle. He's actually in 26 right now. There are some reclassification rumors. So I will, I do like that you put him in this group because his recruitment could accelerate more than your typical sophomore in high school, because there is a lot of talk about him maybe jumping up a class. So that only increases the urgency that LSU and everyone else will need to have with Gregory if he would follow through with that reclassification. But again, as you said, Cortez Hankton's been on this case for quite some time. He might have been the one who offered him at Georgia at the first place. And then there's this perception that the best receivers in Georgia aren't necessarily bulldog locks like they might be along the defensive line or really anywhere on defense or certain other positions, offensive line, where you feel like, man, running back, it's going to be tough to pull this kid out of the state of Georgia. Receiver doesn't have that feel at this time, especially given the departure of the receivers coach there in Athens. So I think Aaron Gregory is an open book until he makes that reclassification decision. And if he does, I do think he'll narrow things. And obviously the main players in SEC country, including LSU, will factor in.
Right now, he's ranked 12th nationally. We're still waiting. You guys are working on the state and the position for the class of 2026. Is he a guy that if he jumps to the class of 2025, if he reclassifies, I mean, he's still going to be up there with the top dogs?
Yeah, I think maybe not like the exact same line, but when you're talking about his skill set, he's a long and lean, explosive pass catcher who can create separation and get to the third level. I mean, that's exactly what you're looking for in this day and age, especially for schools like LSU that want to push the ball down the field. So that stuff translates regardless of your age. And we saw a lot of reclassifications from 25 up to 24 with Ryan Williams and many others. So I think we're getting a little bit of a groove with those reclass guys and what it looks like from a rankings perspective. So yeah, he won't be number 12 overall if he moves up to 2025, but he'll certainly be a top 100 candidate, a blue chip recruit that carries it over and absolutely has a shot to up his stock, thereafter, whenever he does make that decision.
It's always a conversation when they see a reclassification as well with LSU fans because of Colin Hurley, quarterback out of Florida. Definitely one of the youngest guys to ever enroll at Louisiana State University. Looking beyond now, looking at the 2025, 2026, you told me you guys are in meetings. You guys are working on this, getting these new recruitment updates out. Can you give us some insight on when those will be ready and maybe some major movers?
Yeah, we're working on a lot of major movers. Some new 5 stars are coming to light in the class of 2025. Don't worry, DeCorian's in great shape. He's still, I'll break the news. He's going to remain the number 1 receiver in the class. I don't think that's anything earth-shattering, but we will have some more 5 stars joining him in the class of 2025. So that'll be exciting news to put out here over the next week or two. And then, yeah, a lot of changes after the 2023 football season and the early returns from the off-season, camps and combines that we've been able, 7-on-7s we've been able to attend. So, yeah, good news for a lot of the names on this list relative to potentially moving up the ranks as well.
John, you answered all of our questions today. We always thank you for jumping on with us and talking about some of the best recruits in the South for these upcoming recruiting cycles. Can you let everyone know where they can find you on social media and where they can find your work?
Yeah, search my name on social, John Garcia _JR on all platforms. And of course, just check out the written work, rivals.com, or some video work alongside guys like the Van Doren here at Rivals YouTube channel. It's just Rivals Video on YouTube. A lot of fresh stuff up there. We just shot a bunch of one-on-ones over the weekend in Atlanta. So check those out. And we'll be breaking down the movers and shakers next week as well.
Definitely some good sights and sounds that were just posted, I think, today on the rivals.com website that you can go check out. Those are always fun to watch. John, we thank you again for joining us, and we thank everyone for listening on Death Valley Insider. We will see you next time.